In global trade, one bold move can trigger a worldwide chain reaction, and that's exactly what's happening now. President Donald Trump's tariff plan, designed to protect American businesses, has instead sparked a powerful backlash. Canada and the EU are now joining forces against US imports. As their alliance gains momentum, Trump is left panicking, faced with the harsh reality that his strategy may have just backfired. This unexpected twist raises a critical question of what happens when countries stop working together on trade. Well, stick around as we break down the ripple effects still unfolding across economies, industries, and international alliances. Implementation of tariffs. President Trump's administration put a bold plan into action that changed how trade worked between the United States and several other countries. The government decided to place extra fees, called tariffs, on certain products coming into America from other nations. These weren't small changes. They affected billions of dollars worth of goods and caught many people by surprise. The tariffs started with steel and aluminum imports. The administration announced a 25% tax on steel and a 10% tax on aluminum coming from almost all countries. President Trump used something called Section 232 of a trade law that let him put these taxes in place for national security reasons. The idea was that America needed to make more of its own steel and aluminum to stay strong and safe. At first, some countries like Canada, Mexico, and the European Union got temporary passes, but these exceptions ended. Suddenly, even America's closest allies had to pay these extra taxes when selling their metal products to the US. The administration didn't stop there. They also targeted China with special tariffs on about $50 billion worth of Chinese products. These included machinery, electronics, and other manufactured goods. Later, this expanded to cover more than $200 billion in Chinese imports. To put these tariffs in place, the government had to follow certain steps. First, the Commerce Department investigated whether imports were hurting national security. After they said yes, President Trump signed official orders making the tariffs real. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency then had to figure out how to collect these new taxes at ports and entry points across the country. Companies bringing goods into America suddenly had to fill out more paperwork and pay more money. For example, a company importing $100,000 worth of steel now had to pay an extra $25,000 in tariffs. This money went straight to the U.S. Treasury. The administration claimed these tariffs would help American factories and workers. They said that cheaper foreign products were putting U.S. companies out of business, and these new taxes would level the playing field. In steel towns like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and aluminum-producing areas in Kentucky, some workers hoped this meant more jobs and better wages. However, many economists warned about problems. They explained that tariffs are basically taxes that American businesses and eventually consumers end up paying. A car manufacturer in Detroit, for instance, would now pay more for the steel it uses to make vehicles. This could lead to higher prices for anyone buying a new car. The legal basis for these tariffs was questioned by many experts. Some argued that calling Canadian or European steel a national security threat didn't make sense when these countries were close allies. Several affected countries filed complaints with the World Trade Organization, saying America's actions broke international trade rules. American businesses had mixed reactions. Steel and aluminum producers generally supported the tariffs, while companies that use these materials in their products worried about rising costs. Farmers were especially concerned, knowing that other countries might target American farm products in response. The stock market reacted with uncertainty. On days when tariff announcements came out, stock prices often dropped as investors worried about a possible trade war. Business leaders from companies like General Motors and Apple warned that these tariffs could hurt their operations and force them to raise prices. As the tariffs took effect, the administration prepared for possible backlash from other countries, but they seemed surprised by how quickly and strongly Canada and European nations responded with their own counter tariffs. Immediate retaliation by Canada and the EU. When the United States put tariffs on goods from other countries, Canada and the European Union didn't just sit back and take it, they fought back, fast. Canada was the first to respond. Within days of the US announcement, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau held a press conference. Standing at a podium with a serious expression, he announced that Canada would place tariffs on American products worth about $12.8 billion. This matched exactly the value of Canadian steel and aluminum exports that were hit by US tariffs. The Canadian tariffs targeted specific American products like steel and aluminum, but also everyday items that would get people's attention. Things like ketchup, playing cards, lawnmowers, and even maple syrup faced new taxes when crossing the border into Canada. The European Union moved just as quickly. They put together a list of American products worth about $3.2 billion that would face new tariffs. The EU strategy was clever. They specifically chose products made in states where politicians who supported the tariffs came from. Harley-Davidson motorcycles from Wisconsin, bourbon whiskey from Kentucky, and blue jeans from California all got hit with new taxes. Cecilia Malmstrom, the EU's trade commissioner, explained their thinking. "We didn't want this to happen, but the US left us no choice. We need to stand up for fair trade and show that these actions have consequences." Both Canada and the EU made their tariffs dollar for dollar, meaning for every dollar of tariffs the US put on their products, they put the same amount on American goods. It was like saying, if you punch us, we'll punch back just as hard. Mexico joined in too, targeting American farm products like pork, cheese, and apples with new tariffs. They knew these products came from rural areas where many voters had supported the tariffs. What made these responses different from past trade disputes was how quickly they happened and how coordinated they were. Usually, countries take months or even years to respond to tariffs. This time, it took just days. And instead of acting alone, Canada, the EU, and Mexico seemed to be working together. The targeted products weren't random either. They were chosen to cause political pain. By taxing bourbon from Kentucky, for example, the EU was putting pressure on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who represented that state. The message was clear. Your policies are hurting the people who voted for you. When business leaders in these targeted industries started to worry, Jim McGreevey, who represented beer companies that use aluminum cans, warned, "These tariffs are going to cost American jobs." Farmers who suddenly couldn't sell their soybeans to China or their cheese to Mexico began calling their representatives in Congress. The swift retaliation surprised many in Washington who had expected other countries to back down. Instead, America's closest trading partners were fighting back with carefully planned countermeasures designed to cause maximum political and economic pressure. As summer turned to fall, what started as a trade disagreement was turning into something that looked more like a trade war, with both sides digging in for what could be a long and costly fight. Putting tariffs on goods from other countries seemed like a simple plan to help American businesses, but the effects back home were more complicated than many people expected. Economic impact on the United States. Let's start with what happens at the store. When tariffs get added to products coming from places like Canada and the European Union, those products become more expensive. Think about it like this. If a store has to pay more to get something on their shelves, they usually pass that extra cost to customers. This means everyday items, from cars to canned food, end up costing more for regular American families. Take steel and aluminum, for example. When these materials cost more, companies that make things using them, like car manufacturers, construction firms, and even people who make soda cans, have to spend more money. A car company might have to charge an extra $300 per vehicle. Over time, these price increases add up for families already trying to make ends meet. The supply chain problems were another big issue. Many American companies rely on parts or materials from other countries to make their products. When tariffs disrupt this flow, it's like removing pieces from a puzzle. Suddenly, things don't fit together anymore. Factories sometimes had to slow down production or even temporarily shut down while they figured out new suppliers or dealt with delayed shipments. Different industries felt these effects in different ways. Farmers were hit especially hard. When Canada and the EU put tariffs on American farm products in response, many farmers couldn't sell their crops overseas anymore. Some had to let food rot in fields because there was nowhere to sell it. In states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas, this created serious problems for communities where farming is the main source of jobs. Manufacturing workers faced a mixed situation. In some steel plants, workers initially saw more hours and even new jobs as companies tried to make more American steel. But in factories that use steel to make other products, the higher costs led to layoffs. One study showed that for every job created in steel production, about 16 jobs were lost in industries that use steel. Small businesses often struggled the most. Unlike big corporations, they didn't have the money or resources to quickly change their suppliers or absorb higher costs. A small furniture maker in North Carolina might not be able to afford the suddenly more expensive Canadian lumber. A family-owned restaurant chain might see their profit margins disappear when food ingredients cost more. The overall job picture showed concerning trends. While some sectors added jobs, others lost them. In total, several studies suggested that the tariffs led to a net loss of around 300,000 American jobs. These weren't just numbers, they represented real people in communities across the country who suddenly found themselves without paychecks. Consumer confidence also took a hit. When people aren't sure about the economy's future, they tend to save more and spend less. This created a ripple effect through the economy, affecting everything from home sales to restaurant visits. Perhaps most concerning was the long-term impact on American competitiveness. When businesses face higher costs and uncertainty, they often cut back on investments in new equipment, research, and expansion. This means they might fall behind global competitors who don't face the same challenges, making it harder for American companies to lead in their industries in the future. The stock market reflected these worries, with increased volatility as investors tried to figure out which companies would win or lose in this new environment. Retirement accounts and college savings plans fluctuated along with these market swings, affecting millions of Americans who never thought trade policy would impact their financial security. Trump's reaction to the backlash. When President Trump first announced his big tariff plan, he thought it would be a home run. He believed putting taxes on goods from other countries would bring jobs back to America and make the US stronger. But things didn't go as planned. As news spread about Canada and the European Union teaming up against the US tariffs, Trump was caught off guard. He hadn't expected such a united front from America's longtime friends and trading partners. In the White House, his mood quickly changed from confident to frustrated. This is not what was supposed to happen, Trump reportedly told his advisors during a heated meeting. They were supposed to back down, not gang up on us. The president's first public reaction came through his favorite communication tool, Twitter. Early one morning, he fired off a series of messages. Our so-called allies are taking advantage of the US in trade. No more. America first. And if Canada and Europe want a trade war, they'll get one. The US will win big. Behind closed doors, the situation was more complicated. Some of Trump's economic advisors warned him that the backlash could hurt American businesses and consumers. They showed him reports of rising prices on everyday items and worried farmers who couldn't sell their crops overseas because of the new tariffs other countries put on American goods. Trump's trade team split into two camps. One group, led by trade advisor Peter Navarro, pushed to double down on the tariffs, arguing that showing weakness would hurt America's position. The other group, including Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, suggested a more careful approach and possibly reopening talks with Canada and Europe. For several days, Trump swung between these positions. In public, he remained tough, telling reporters at a press conference, "The US has been ripped off for decades. These tariffs are long overdue, and other countries need to play fair." But as American companies started reporting problems and the stock market dropped, Trump began to show signs of concern. He called several business leaders to hear directly about how the trade fight was affecting them. After one call with the CEO of a major manufacturing company who described laying off workers because of rising steel costs, Trump was unusually quiet. The president then tried a new strategy, offering to remove tariffs if other countries made deals favorable to the US. He directed his team to reach out quietly to Canadian officials about possible negotiations. At the same time, he publicly maintained his tough stance, not wanting to appear weak to his supporters. As pressure mounted from Republican lawmakers representing farming states and manufacturing districts, Trump announced a $12 billion aid package for farmers hurt by the trade disputes. This move showed he recognized the pain his policies were causing, even if he wouldn't admit it directly. In private meetings, Trump expressed surprise at how quickly other countries had responded with their own tariffs. By the end of the month, Trump's approach had shifted to a mix of tough talk and quiet diplomacy. He continued to defend his tariff strategy in public, while instructing his negotiators to find face-saving compromises behind the scenes. The president, who had once declared trade wars easy to win, was learning that global trade relationships were far more complex than he had imagined. Future of US trade relations. The trade battle between the United States, Canada, and the European Union has created ripple effects that will likely shape international commerce for years to come. What started as President Trump's tariff plan has evolved into something much bigger, a fundamental shift in how countries work together on trade. Looking ahead, experts see several possible paths for US trade relationships. The most immediate concern is that American consumers might end up paying more for everyday items. When tariffs get placed on imported goods, companies often pass those those extra costs to shoppers. This means higher prices for things like cars, electronics, and even food. For American farmers, the future looks especially uncertain. Many depend on selling their crops to other countries. With Canada and the EU putting their own tariffs on American farm products, farmers are losing customers they've relied on for generations. A Wisconsin dairy farmer explained it simply: "We can't just find new buyers overnight. These relationships took years to build." American factories face a similar problem. Many manufacturing companies use materials from different countries to make their products. When steel and aluminum become more expensive because of tariffs, these companies have tough choices to make: raise their prices, cut jobs, or move operations to other countries where materials cost less. Meanwhile, Canada and the European Union are creating new trade partnerships that might leave the US on the outside. They've started talking more with China, Japan, and other Asian countries about deals that would make it easier to trade with each other instead of the US. One Canadian trade official put it this way: "We can't put all our eggs in the American basket anymore." This shift could have long-lasting effects. For decades, the US has been at the center of global trade. American companies could easily sell their products around the world, and the US had a strong voice in setting international trade rules. That position might be weakening as other countries form their own alliances. Some businesses are already changing how they operate because of these trade tensions. A Michigan auto parts maker recently opened a new factory in Mexico instead of expanding in the US. The company's president explained, "We need to be able to sell to customers in Canada and Europe without paying extra tariffs." For regular Americans, these changes might not be obvious right away, but they could affect job opportunities and prices over time. If US companies struggle to sell their products overseas, they might hire fewer workers. And if imported goods become more expensive, families might have less money to spend on other things. There's also the question of trust between countries. Trade deals depend on countries believing each other will keep their promises. The current disputes have damaged some of that trust. A European diplomat noted, "Even if we resolve this specific issue, we now know we need backup plans for our trade relationships." Some economists believe these tensions could eventually lead to new, better trade agreements. Others worry about a more divided world where countries trade mainly with their close allies. Either way, most agree that the old system of global trade is changing. For students today, these changes will shape the job market they'll enter in the future. Some industries might shrink in the US, while others grow. The skills that will be valuable might change too, with more emphasis on flexibility and understanding global connections. What's clear is that trade isn't just about buying and selling goods. It's about relationships between countries. And like all relationships, once trust is broken, it takes time and effort to rebuild.